Sitting day. I call on Government Order of the Day number 10.
Psychoactive Substances Bill interrupted debate on second reading.
And when this debate was interrupted, Claire Curran had the floor and has 6 minutes 30 seconds remaining if she so desires to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's
Claire
not every day that a young woman walks into your electorate office just straight out of a psychiatric institution where she had been hospitalised and receiving intensive treatment for an addiction to and symptoms arising from taking synthetic cannabis. This young woman was very sick. She did not have 24 years old, did not have a history of drug taking, had got herself into the situation where she'd taken some synthetic cannabis and become quickly addicted. She was very sick, and she was very adamant that she wanted a law change as quickly as possible. That was in March this year, and subsequently my office was besieged with a number of phone calls from schools, from concerned parents, and from other organisations around this issue. This is, as we know, a huge issue for parents, for our children, for our community generally, for schools, for the police, for our health services, and there's been some very good work done in my community by our health services. We have a toxicologist at the Dunedin Hospital, Dr. Leo Shep, who has been doing some very good work on this and some studies on this issue. His work is yet to be released, but it will help with the treatment of addiction to these substances. Following those representations, I visited dairies. I wrote to dairies. Every dairy in my electorate visited them. I visited users in prison. I supported a petition in my electorate. I went back to those dairies that had said that they were still selling it and asked them to cease. I spoke to the Dunedin Police on a number of occasions, and I met with organisations such as the Salvation Army. 2 weeks ago, I was invited to and attended a symposium in Dunedin at the Waikarere Hospital run by the DHB and Mental Health Services, which included inpatient services, community-based mental health services, emergency psychiatric services, specialist alcohol and drug services, and others. Here's some of the things that they said arising from that meeting. They said that synthetic cannabis was a clinical burden on health services, that emergency department patients had cyclical vomiting and seizures from smoking synthetic cannabis, that many of patients experienced seizures, delayed seizures up to a day after smoking synthetic cannabis. A 22-year-old man who'd been in the emergency department 14 times with synthetic cannabis-related issues in the past 6 months. 13% of admissions to the acute psychiatric work at Waikarere Hospital in a 14-week period earlier this year were related to synthetic cannabis. In 2010, there were no synthetic cannabis-related admissions to that hospital. The average age of patients admitted was 10 years younger than in 2010. A community mental health nurse said that some of the synthetic cannabis manufacturers were using extremely clever marketing to target children, and said we were fighting a losing battle and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And this was in the knowledge that this law was going to pass through the Parliament. They said that patients were being admitted daily to the psychiatric wards to detoxify, and that many of them had no prior history of mental illness or substance abuse. I could go on and on about this issue. Thankfully, and as a result of the inputs, particularly and the work put in on this side of the House by the Labour members to this bill, especially, and I'd like to acknowledge Ian Lees-Galloway, there is in the commentary to this bill a section headed Possible Increased Demand on Health Services, which reads, "We acknowledge that with the banning of some substances currently available, there could be increased demand on our mental health and drug and alcohol services, which health providers will need to make provision for." Mr. Speaker, in the committee stages of this bill, I will be putting a question to the Minister as to what provisions are being made in the health services for the effect of this bill and what this will mean for our communities, such as the community in Dunedin, which is no different to many other communities around our country, where there are significant effects of these drugs that will not cease as a result of passing this bill in the House. As the police have said to me and my colleagues in Dunedin, these drugs are likely to go underground. People who are addicted to these drugs will still want to try and get them. There will be increased effects from these drugs. We need to know how we are going to handle them as a community. And in this House, I think there has to be some responsibility taken by the government for putting increased services into the services that are needed. Thank you.
Speaker.
Shane Arden.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And it is a privilege and a